Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, learning Succah daf Hey. We are going to begin on the very bottom of Dalet Amud Beis, about 6 lines from the bottom. V'sheni gavoa sara tfachim. So the Gemara quotes our Mishnah that if you have a sukkah which is less than 10 tfachim, a tefach which is a hand's breadth, let's call it 3 to 4 inches. If you have a sukkah which is so small, as we saw, that's a dira srucha, that is too small, and therefore one is not able to fulfill the obligation of sitting in the sukkah. But Manoah, how do we know that's the exact measurement? So the Gemara is going to give two answers to this. So Itmar, we want as follows. Rav Chanina, Rav Yochanan, Rav Chaviva must bekul seder moed. When it comes to all seder moed, this is brought down, this language in a few other places. Kol ki ha'zuga. Whenever you have this whole group together, Chalifi Rav Yochanan, Mali Rav Yonasan. It's actually Rav Yonasan who is part of the group. So what was the answer? So Aaron Tisha, the Paris Tefach Harikana Sar. When it came to the Mishkan, the Aaron was 9 tefachim high, and then above it was the Kapyrus, which was its covering. So therefore, that equals 10. The Ksiv, the pasuk says, that I'll meet you there, but I'll speak to you from above the Kapyrus, which again, this is referring to the Mishkan. And the Mishkan, therefore, is telling you that the Shechina resides above 10 tefachim. As we continue here with the Tanya, Rav Yossi Amr, the Shechina never went below. Even the great Moshe Rabbeinu and Eliyahu never ascended to the very high. Where says 1 second? That's not true. You're telling me that the Shechina never came down to earth? It says Hashem went to Har Sinai. Hashem Shechina only went up to 10 tefachim, but the last 10 tefachim, no. But the pasuk also says V'amdu raglo b'yoimahu al har hazesim, that Hashem Kaviyachal, anthropomorphically speaking, had his feet on the mountain. So again, it means l'malam yasar tefachim. It doesn't mean literally on, but it means close. Below ol Moshe Eliyahu l'maro. Moshe ol Elokim. He ascended to Hashem. L'mati misar. He was not exactly there. There's a 10 tefachim gap between him and Hashem. That Eliyahu also in a storm went up to the heavens. It says that he held on to the Kisi HaKavod. So Pirshaz Olav Ananu, it spread out the cloud. The Amar Rav Tancham Malamed, we went up for this pasuk in Iyov, Shapir Shaka in the Ziv Shechinasai, that Hashem spread out for protection his Shechina, the Ananu Allah, and he protected him. Lamati Masar. Again, it was less than 10. What do you mean? He was holding on to it. So how is it possible to say it was within less than 10 tefachim, or it was more than 10 tefachim away, if he was actually holding on to it? He was right there. So your answer is the Kisi HaKavod was like stretched out and came down and he grabbed onto it. So it's true, he did hold on to it, but it was 10 tefachim away from the Shechina. Fine. So Bishlam Aaron Tisha, I know that the Aaron was 9 tefachim high. The pasuk says it. The Yasu Aaron Atzi Shitim, it was made of acacia wood, of a sign of Chatzi Arko. It was an amma and a half in length, amma and a half in width, and here's the most important one, an amma and a half in height. So we know that an amma is 6 tefachim. So it's an amma and a half, it's 6 and 3, so therefore you have 9 tefachim. So you can understand that in fact that's the case when it comes to to the Aaron was 9 tefachim. El Kapyrus Tefach Manolan. How do we know that the Kapyrus, the covering on the top of this, was an extra tefach? The Tani Rabbi Chanina, Kol Kam Shosa Moshe, all the kalim that Moshe made, Nos Mehen Teres Midas Arkan Umidas Rachman Umidas Kamasan. All of them had the measurements of the length, width, and height. However, the Kapyrus Midas Arkan Midas Rachman Nasna, Midas Kamasan Lo Nasna. It only told us the length and the width, which is obvious because it covered the Aaron. So we know certainly it was 1.5 by 1.5 in length and width. But it doesn't mention anything its height. So how do we learn out its height. It doesn't say anything about it. So how do we know it's a tefach? So Sevalam Mipocha Shebakalim. Let's learn out from the smallest of the kalim. Shnemar Yasisalo Misgeres Taifach Savit. So we learn out regarding the Misgeres, which is the border of the Shulchan Hazav in the Kodesh room, that this border was a tefach. So Mal Laholan tefach, Afkan tefach. So we went up from the Misgeres, just like the Misgeres was a tefach, so too it must be the Kaparos was a tefach. So 1 second, the nail Mikalim Gufayu. Once you went out from the Shulchan itself, which is much bigger. So your answer is, as we're going to have this more than once, Tafasta Merubal Tafasta, Tafasta Mute Tafasta. When we can grab onto something, we grab onto the smaller measurement, not the larger one. So therefore, it could either be a large kli or something small, so we're going to assume it's the smallest one. The smallest thing is a tefach. So the nail of Mitzitz, one went out from the golden headband of the Kohen Gadol, the sign Yitzitz Daimik Kimin Tashel Zav, Baruch Bezetz Bois. Its width was only 2 fingers, not a tefach. Umukav Oizen Oizen, and it went from one ear to the other. Because of la Beishitin Yud and a Hey Milmala, had Hashem's name a Yud and a Hey on the top. The Kodesh Lamed Lilmata. Yom Rabbi Eliezer, this is an unbelievable sentence. Rav Yosef Iri Isi Baraimi because of la Kodesh Hashem B'Shita Achas. We know the Romans took everything from the second Beit HaMikdash. You can look at the Arch of Titus and see that engraved in it is the menorah. They clearly stole or took all these items. He probably also took the tzitz, and he actually saw it. He saw the tzitz, and that's what it looked like. Regardless of how Hashem's name was written on the tzitz, we know it was Kodesh Hashem. The most important thing was only 2 etzba'is. So we should maybe use that as an example. Maybe the kapara should only be 2 etzba'is. So done in kli meklivin, done in kli metachshet. We can only compare it to a misgeris, which is a kli. This is a kli. The kaparis can't compare it to the tzitz. The tzitz is a garment. It's a takshet. It's an ornament. It's a takshet, clothing. So v'nel mizar, yomer mar zar mashahu. Again, the zar is this decorative piece, which was very, very small and significant. You look over here in this picture. Maybe now this is about 30 years old, but again, maybe we have some that are in color. But regardless, the zar, as you can see, was this very small thing above it. Maybe. So done in kli meklivin, done in kli mehechsher kli. It's not the kli itself, it's only the decorative piece connected to it. It's not even a kli, it's a hechsher kli. So ihach masgeres nami hechsher kli, who the masgeres on the border was the border of for the shulchan hazav. That's the same thing. It's a hechsher kli. No masgar to lamata haisa. The masgeres was actually below the shulchan hazav, so it wasn't decorative. It was decorative would be on the top. Well, 1 second. So machokas. And ichamadi oimer. Misgart lamata haisa, lamadi yarmer misgart lamal haisa ma'ikam eimer, hai hasher klihu. It was on the top. Why would you say that the mascaris is any better than the zar? In fact, you should maybe say the zar is better because it's smaller. We always and you say tafasta miyot tafasta. Whereas it says no, you can't learn out from the zar. Why? El dun and davar shenasna b'taramida. You can only use something which has a measurement. Midavar shenasna b'taramida. Yachechut tzitz zar. You're right. The zar was a mashu. The tzitz was 2 etzba'is. But it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah those measurements. It doesn't mention any measurements when it comes to those things. When it comes to the mascaris, that does mention that it's a tefach, right? The pasuk says v'yasisa lo mascaris telefach savin, right? And when we compare it to the kaparis does mention the length and the width in the Torah. It just doesn't mention the height. So therefore, that's why you can learn out from the mascaris, not the tzitz of the zar. Okay. Rav Huna Omer Mahacha. He has a different pasuk. The pasuk says al pnei kaparis kedma. So the ein ponim, it says the pnei, the face. So what is a face? The face is about a tefach. The ein ponim is about tefach. The ein, let's say, this Gemara is brought down elsewhere. Kafi Davars Rashi says this is a oif gadol, as we're now on Hamid Bays, a big bird. So again, it can't be referring to that because tafasta merubal tafasta miyut tafasta. Okay. So again, we're not going to use the bigger measurement, we'll use the smaller one. So the aim of kafi de tziparta. So if that's the case, maybe we should be focusing on a very small little bird, like a hummingbird, the zutter tuva, that's even smaller than a tefach. So Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Rav Huna Pnei Pnei Gomer. We went to Gzer Shava. Ksiv Hacha Al Pnei Kaparis. Ksiv Hasa Me'ez Pnei Kaparis Avid. So therefore, it talks about a face of a person. Yitzchak's face, which is a person, which is a tefach. Hanil Meponim Shel Mala. Maybe we should talk about Hashem Kaviyochel's face. That's in Ki Rois Pnei Elokim V'Tirtzeni. Again, Tavas Merubal Tavas, Tavas Miyut Tavasa. Even though Hashem has no body, even though the most are no guf, but nonetheless, you can imagine if we are going to be imagining Hashem's face, it's going to be that which is large. Okay. V'nelch Mekruv. So why don't we learn out from a kruv, bird? Tachsiv Ela Kapayris Yupnei Akruvim. And we know that on the top of the Aron, on the top of the Kvaris, were these two angel-like figures, which are the cherubs. So Omer Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Gemiri in Pnei Kruvim V'Chlusim Tefach. So we can say from the Kruvim themselves, which actually makes sense, on the top of the Kapyrus. So just like the Kapyrus is a tefach, we're going to learn that out from the Kruvim. Rav Huna Nami Malki Gomer. You're right. Taki could learn out from there. It's true. My Kruv. What exactly is a Kruv? So Rabbi Bo, Karavia, like a young child, she came above currently Nuka Ravia. That's what they call a little child. Okay. Armle Bai. El Miata Dechsev Pnei Echad Pnei Kruv. Pnei Sheni Pnei Adam. So Hainu Kruv, Hainu Adam. So Chayra, you're telling me that it's a face, it's a person. It sounds like they're two separate things. No, it really is one. It's a person. However, it's the age. Api Ravri Api Zutri. One's an older person's face, and one's a younger person's face. There's other girsos. It's a male, a female. Fine. Let's stop there for a second, and let's see question 13. Mehechen nilmad de'uvia shel hakaparis tefach. How do we know this? Either we went up from the Miskeres of the Shulchan, the Hainu Pachais Mibikelim, which is the smallest one, which has a shear, or because of the pasuk says Pnei Kapiris or Pnei Kruvim B'Gemiri De'ein Pnei Kruvim Plusin Mitefach. Weiter. Now, how are we learning this out? We're learning out a Sukkah from the Aron. The Aron is 9, and then you have the Kapiris, which we established as 1, so that's 10. And then that's it, so the Sukkah has to be 10. So Gemara asks a practical question. We know you're supposed to have 10 tefachim of airspace, and then above it is the schach. You can't have the schach below, within that 10 tefachim, as we saw in yesterday's daf. So which brings us to the following question. How do we know that the space of 10 is excluding the schach? Maybe it's including the schach. Maybe at the edge, the top of the kaparis, which is 10, you can even have the schach within that space, which means maybe the sukkah itself, the airspace, can be 9 is enough. So the truth is, you can't go up from the Mishkan, but rather going up from the base of Woman from the base of Mikdash, which of course the dimensions of everything was much larger, as it was a permanent structure. As it says in Melachim Aleph, discussing the binyan of Shlomo Melech, the Bayis Asher Bana HaMelech Shlomo Hashem Shishim Amos Arko. So it says that the bias was 60 amos in length, the esrim rachboi 20 in width, ushloishim amos kamasai, and it says that it was 30 amos high. And this was, as we saw in yesterday in the Succah Yoma, about how that we had an amatroxylin, we had this wall, and then in the second base mikdash, which the wall was even higher, we weren't able to have that, so we had parochas, we had 2 curtains. The height of one of the kruvim was Eser Ba'amot, 10 amos high. The Chene Kruv Sheni, so to the other one, the adjacent one. Latanya, Mamatzin Beis Alamin. Just like when it comes to the base of Mikdash, Kruvim B'Shlish Habayis Hein Oimdin, they were a third of the size of the house. So again, how do we see this? The house was 30 amos, the base of Mikdash was 30 amos high. The Kruvim reached 1/3, which is 10. So 1/3 is the ratio. So if that's the ratio there in the base of Mikdash, it stands to reason it'll be the same ratio in the Mishkan. So Mishkan Nami, Kruvim b'shlish habayis hein oimlim. The Kruvim stood at 1/3 of the height. So Mishkan Kami Havi, how big was the Mishkan? Eser Amos. It was 10 amos. How do we know that? D'chsiv Eser Amos Orech HaKarish, that the planks were 10 amos high. There's a machlokas in the Succah Shabbos if they were completely square or were they pointed at the top. But regardless, it was 10 amos. Now we know 10 amos is how many tefachim? Kami Havilahu Shisin Poishli. That's 60 tefachim. 60 tefachim. So Talasa, a third of 60 Kamahavi, Esrim Poishli, 20. Again, we want to imagine that the top of the Kruvim was 1/3 of the height of the entire Mishkan. So if the entire Mishkan was 60 tefachim high, which is 10 amos, so it must be that the Kruvim were at 20. Now, if that's the case, Dal Asara the Arn Kaparis, Pashalahu Asara. So we're not actually measuring the 10 of the Arn and the Kaparis. We know the Arn and the Kaparis were 10. But now what we're actually going to do is we're going to measure from the top of the Kaparis to where the Kruvim ended, where their wingspan was, which was like Succah, which was protected. So therefore, it must be that the Kruvim were also 10 tefachim. And it's interesting to think about it. The Kruvim are like people. They're angel-like figures, but they look like people. So it's Ki'ilu, someone who's within 10 tefachim, and then the wingspan is above it, which is also when it comes to a sukkah. Which again, it shows you the ruchnistic thought that one should have when you're in a sukkah. It's Ki'ilu, it's just like the wingspan in the Kaddish Kedoshim of the Kruvim. V'ksiv, v'hayu Kruvim parsing rafayim l'mala, they were above, and here's the key word, soichachim v'kanfehim al kapiris. They covered up the kapiris with their wingspan above it. Parach manaskach l'mal misara. So we see above 10 is considered to be schach, and therefore that is the raya. The raya, very interestingly enough, at least according to this pshat, we know that the Aron apparently is 9 tefachim. We'll see it, maybe that, and we'll hold it that. Kaparis was 1, so that's 10. And we know that the base of Lomim was 30 amos, the Kruvim were 10 amos, so 1/3 of the height. So 1/3 of the height of the Mishkan, which was 60 tefachim, is 20 tefachim. So therefore, 10 tefachim was the Kruvim. So Mamai, correct the Gemara, how do we know that the wings were above? Maybe they were at the same height. They weren't above it. So Rabbi it says above. Maybe they looked up way above. No, it doesn't say above, just above. And therefore that's a great proof. But it's a machlokas Rabbi and Rabbi Huda. When the pasuk doesn't say 6 tefachim, it says it's 1.5 amos. The question is how many tefachim is an amos. So according to the sheet of Rameir, would be good because he holds that it's baininess, which is 6 tefachim. So 6 plus 3, as we said, is 9. The Aron was 9 tefachim. The Kapiris was 1 equals 10, and then you have 20. 10 plus 10 is the 20, and then you have the schach above. So that's the raya that the Kruvim were within 10, was a 10 tefachim thing. El Rabbi Huda the Amar Amashal Binyan Shish tefachim. When it comes to the binyan, it was 6. However, Shal Kalim Chamisha. When it came to the Aron, it was actually in 5 tefachim. So therefore, here's the problem. When it says it's 1.5 amos, it means that amos is only 5. Half is 2.5, which means according to the Shita, the Aron was only 7.5 tefachim. The Kruvim fine, the Kaparis fine was a tefa, which is only 8.5. So for the Gemara, Maya Kamemar, what are you going to say? Aron Kaparis Maya Kama Havilahu Tavyu Palga is only 8.5. Pashlu Chad Sari Palga. That means from the wingspan of where the Kruvim were to where the bottom of where the Kaparis was, now you have 11.5, because we're saying we're still going to hold that the Kruvim were 1/3. So 1/3 of 60 we said is 20 tefachim. But the problem is the Kruvim were on the top of the Kaparis, and the Kaparis is only reached up to 8.5, which means maybe the Sukkah should be 11.5 tefachim, not 10. Maybe it should be 11.5 tefachim. So the Gemara says, "Ema Sukkah adi havi chad sar yupalga." So Elul Rabbi Huda helps the Gemara law. It's actually Halacha Moshe Sinai, which is the second shot. We don't learn out 10 Tfachim from Sukkim, from Droshes, right? It's a Halacha Moshe Sinai. As we've seen, we're going to conclude with this line. The Gemara is going to discuss this at greater length. The Omer Rav Chia Barashi Omer Rav Shiurin Chatzitzin Machitzin Halacha Moshe Sinai. Measurements, which we'll discuss what that is. Chatzitza when it comes to going to the mikveh, and machitzas when it comes to the walls of Sukkah, among other things, is all Halacha Moshe Sinai. And this is, tomorrow's daf is going to be mamish identical to the Gemara on Daf Daled Masechtas Eruvin, the same Shakavatariya, but we're going to wait to see that daf tomorrow. Otherwise, we'll end up just finishing half of this next Amud. So we're going to stop there. Let's see question 14. So one man diarmer is 10 tefachim. The other man diarmer would be 11 and a half. Okay. Question TA 15. Minayin shikaparis avia tefach. This is the same question we had before. How do we know the thickness is a tefach? So either because we went up from the skeres, or because the pasuk says Pnei HaKaparis. That was the same question as question 13. That was TA 15. Okay. 16. Succah Asoi Kimin Gam. We didn't do that yet. TB 16. Mahoy Semidus Karmasa Shel Kaparis. What was the height of the Kaparis? So we know that the Kaparis was a tefach. And how do we know this? So this is how they want you to answer it. Question 16. We know. It's actually a very long answer, he says. It doesn't give us the measurement, so we went up from the Paksha B'Kelim, which is the Misgaris. Or maybe because the pasuk says Pnei HaKapiris, Pnei Kruvim, Gemir De'en Pnei Kruvim, Pachais Mitefach. So again, that is pretty similar again to what we just saw, that we learned out the Kapiris again either from the Misgaris, mamish the same questions as 13. This is TB 16. Fine. Let's see, maybe one or two of Rav Shlomer's questions. Let's see. This was back in 1989. You see I got 100 on this test. Let's see some of these questions. Madua in Lilmoid Shir Goiva Kaparis with Sitz. So either a tzitz is a beged for the Kohen Gadol, we don't learn it out from the clothes of the Kohen, or tzitz in the Zar is lo nasna mida klal. But by the Kalim we see that it does mention a mida in the Torah. Hezber eich lamad rameir shir yutfachim l'sukkah mebeis alamin. So I made a lot of mistakes here, but I got the question right. So again, we know that the Beis Alamin was 10 amos high, 60 tefachim. As we said, the Kruvim is 20, is 1/3. It was 20, so 1/3. So the ratio is 1/3. So when it comes to the Mishkan, it's also 1/3. So the Arnik Kaparis was 10. It must be, because we know the Mishkan was 60 tefachim, so therefore it reached to 20 tefachim, which is 1/3 of 60. And therefore the din is that we see the Kruvim was 10 tefachim. And therefore above that was the wingspan. Mashir Ha'aron Afi Rabbi Huda B'Tfachim. So it should be either 9 or 8.5. Mashir Alma B'Katana. Okay, fine.